Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue heading east towards Glasgow this evening along the M8. Now, a lorry broke down at junction 19, the Anderston Cross exit. It's long been cleared, with Quaysbank junction 26 at Hillington not being helped by those roadworks by the Woodside viaducts, of course. And in Leicestershire, north of Hinckley, the A447, the Hinckley Road at Cadeby, that's closed for a police investigation. Long delays on the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25 clockwise from junction 23 at the A1M all the way around to the A10 after an earlier crash, not being helped by the roadworks near the A1M, of course. Staying in Hertfordshire, the A414 remains closed westbound east of Hertford following an accident off the A10. The M2 in Kent remains shut both ways, junction 5 at Sittingbourne to 6 at Faversham for accident investigation work. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Tonight on Farage, I asked the question, should Parliament debate and vote before we push up the war against Ukraine or indeed any other military involvement? We'll talk about John Prescott, his legacy, one of the last working-class heroes in Parliament, but why are there so few working-class people there today? And let's talk about free speech. Really good news that the Essex police case against Alison Pearson has been dropped. But do we need a proper debate about the hate laws in this country? And Nissan are warning us that the government's net zero warnings and targets could be catastrophic for the British car industry. How do we deal with the threat of cheap electric cars coming in from China? But before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. These are your headlines at 7 o'clock. Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to strike the UK with a new ballistic missile after using the weapon to hit a target in Ukraine. Downing Street condemned Mr. Putin for further escalating the conflict by using a ballistic missile with a range of several thousand kilometres against the city of Dnipro. Mr. Putin confirmed Russia has tested a new intermediate-range weapon, saying it came in response to Ukraine's strikes on the Russian territory with US and British missiles earlier this week. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the leader of Hamas, as well as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the country's former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. They say these warrants are as a result of alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. In response, an Israeli foreign minister has said the ICC has, quote, lost all legitimacy with their ruling on Netanyahu and Gallant. Meanwhile, a Hamas senior official has told the Reuters news agency that these warrants are an important step towards justice. And back in the UK, the King has paid a warm personal tribute to Lord John Prescott, saying he remembered him with great fondness for his unique and indomitable character and infectious sense of humour. King Charles hailed the former Deputy Prime Minister, who has died at the age of 86, for his decades of public service in frontline politics. His family said he'd spent his life trying to improve the lives of others, fighting for social justice and protecting the environment. In other news, journalist Alison Pearson has told GB News she is hugely relieved that Essex Police has dropped its investigation into her tweet. Ms Pearson was being investigated for allegedly stirring up racial hatred with a social media post made in November of last year. But the force now says no charges will be brought, having sought advice from the Crown Prosecution Service. Ms Pearson says her case has revealed the appalling overuse of non-crime hate incidents to silence opinions. To the US now, where Donald Trump ally Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration to be the next US Attorney General after days of debate over whether to release a report on alleged sexual misconduct and drug use. Posting on X, the 42-year-old said that the controversy over his potential nomination was unfairly becoming a distraction to the work of the incoming Trump administration. And it's Deck the Halls at Windsor Castle as the royal residence gets into the festive spirit. The Royal Collection Trust has said that the theme this year is red and gold in order to symbolise what they called the royal magnificence. They added that the main Christmas tree, which is decked in some 3,000 lights and hundreds of decorations, was taken from the nearby Home Park and will be replanted after the festive season. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. We don't normally boast here at GB News, but you know what? For once, I am going to, because on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, and let's hope Thursday and Friday as well, but on those first 3 days of this week, on the ratings taken right across the day, we have beaten not only Sky News, but the BBC News Channel as well. We have been the #1 news channel in the UK this week. It's only taken us 3 years to get here. And you know what? I think it will only continue to grow. So well done to those that had the vision for founding GB News. Well done for those that run it and work here. I think that is a really big achievement. And forgive me, but we are, for the moment, going to have a little boast. Now, moving on. We talked last night about the use of Storm Shadows, our missiles being sent deep into Russia. Now, it is possible, of course, that some of those missiles were used in Crimea earlier. I don't know. Whichever way you cut it, this is seen as an escalation in the war. The Russians, of course, have responded in kind, with the Russian ambassador today saying that basically we are now direct participants in the war. But I'm not worried about threats from Russia. What I'm thoughtful about is, should Parliament have a vote before we decide to go to war or escalate a war? And there are pros and cons with this, but here's one example of where it really worked. Back in 2013, we had David Cameron as Prime Minister, William Hague as Foreign Secretary. They were hell-bent on arming the rebels against Assad in the Syrian civil war. I have to say I was vehemently opposed to that happening, as were a growing number of members of Parliament, and as was public opinion. Well, in the end, Cameron gave in. He gave the House of Commons a vote on should we arm the rebels, and this was his response after the vote.
It is clear to me that the British Parliament, reflecting the views of the British people, does not want to see British military action. I get that, and the government will act accordingly. Yeah.
That was a great victory, a victory for common sense, because had we armed the rebels, those rebels, many of them, turned out to become an organisation called ISIS. Quite how the Foreign Secretary didn't resign over that vote, I never understood. But Jeremy Corbyn, now whatever you think of him, he's actually quite good occasionally at raising big points of national debate. Corbyn has said that Parliament should have had a vote before we increased and escalated to using storm shadows. Now, government does have the ability, through the royal prerogative, to go to war or escalate war without going to Parliament. But let me ask you, should Parliament get a vote on increasing our contribution to the Ukraine war? Give me your thoughts. Farage at GBNews.com. I'm joined by Mark Francois, Conservative Shadow Minister for Defence. Mark, it's a nuanced argument, but clearly in the case of 2013, had Cameron and Hague used royal prerogative, gone ahead and armed the rebels, that would have been a catastrophic error.
Nigel, I understand your point, but the two situations are completely different.
Sure.
Ukraine, which was a sovereign nation, has been invaded by Russia, and we are aiding the Ukrainians to defend themselves. We are not at war with Russia, but we have, like many Western nations, provided support to Ukraine, including financial support, political support, and, yes, military support. But the two are completely different. I mean, forgive me, but as you've raised the Syria example, I can't help but remind myself that Lord Ali, in the Lords at the time, was talking up the fact that he'd had meetings with President Assad and was arguing, in essence, against striking that. I think it's just worth, as you choose that example, reminding people that that was Lord Ali's position, and now he's very, very influential within the Labour government. Passes for passes and all
that of itself is not unacceptable.
But to come back to your point, the two, I understand the point that you're making.
Yeah.
But I think the two situations are very, very different, because we, like a lot of other Western nations, thankfully, are arming the Ukrainians to defend themselves. Now, when Ben Wallace was the Defence Secretary, he saw this coming. We started training Ukrainian troops after the first invasion in 2014. We talk about the invasion in 2022, but actually Ukraine was invaded in 2014 in the Donbass and in the Crimea. And after that, we in Britain started training Ukrainian soldiers. So when the Russians invaded again in 2022, and we saw lots of footage of the invading columns being taken out by British NLAWs, which is the NLAWs, a sort of 21st century bazooka. That is not an easy operation to do. That takes months of training, and we trained those Ukrainian soldiers to do that. So I understand your point, but the two situations are very, very different.
So, Mark, our position has been we will help Ukraine train their troops, provide weapons for them to defend themselves.
Yes.
I get that. The escalation is when British Storm Shadow missiles are being fired into Russia. That is an escalation. What if, let me put this to you.
No, forgive me, it's not. Let me explain.
Well, surely it is.
Well, no, look, let's look at who we're dealing with. Vladimir Putin is an ex-regular KGB colonel. He's not a Boy Scout. He is on the record as describing the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He has talked time and again, in effect, about recreating the Russian Empire. And everything he has done has been consistent with that aim. So he's been the one sending missiles to take out Ukrainian power stations to try and freeze them. Hang on. He's the one that's authorised the use of rockets, missiles, against children's hospitals. He's the guy that's invited the North Koreans to send 10,000 troops. No, hang on.
Mark, we can agree with all of that. What I'm talking about is our response and our contribution.
No, but this is what he does.
No, you're saying he's a bad dude. Right, we get that. Fine, all right? Yeah. He's a very bad person. We get that. The invasion's wrong. We absolutely get that.
Right.
I don't disagree with you on that one little bit. What I'm talking about is the relationship between voters, parliament, government, and big... We've done these things so far. If we were to send ground troops to Ukraine, should that be subject to a parliamentary vote?
On the escalation point, which is the essence of your argument, he escalates again and again And then when the West does anything in response to help it, he says, you're escalating the conflict.
OK, so Parliament shouldn't have a vote?
Not on this. I don't think so.
And if we send troops, Parliament shouldn't have a vote?
If we were to send a brigade of soldiers to Ukraine, then I think you would have a stronger argument. But I still say that the two situations are different. And I make the point again, I'm sorry, Nigel, but I know you and I, we respectfully disagree on this one. But what Putin does...
we don't disagree. I agree with you. Everything Putin has done is wrong and bad. I agree with that.
But on the escalation point we do, he escalates time and again, and when anyone responds, he then accuses them of escalation, and that's all aimed at Western public opinion.
I get that as well. I'm joined also tonight by Ranul Jayawardena, former Conservative MP, and Stella Santakidou, political commentator and public affairs consultant. Ranul, you know, I gave the 2013 example. I mean, thank God Parliament did have a vote. It would have been a mistake. I understand the point Mark's making, but this is big stuff, isn't it? I mean, what is Parliament for?
Well, clearly Parliament is the place to debate huge issues of state, whether that's domestic or international. But I think government, whoever's in government, has to have the agility to be able to act quickly. And so the risk of having Corbyn's law, as it were, and he's proposed this many times, to have a binding vote in Parliament before any action can be taken, means that Britain is no longer a serious force in the world. And, you know, we are a big power in the world, even today, even though we should have a bigger military and more defence spending. We are still a credible force. We're still one of the permanent members of the Security Council. We've got to have the ability to act quickly. And heaven forbid, there are conflicts where we need to really push that at a moment's notice, but we need to make sure the government has the power to do that.
Stella?
Nigel, we know from polling that the majority of the British voters support Ukraine and they want to see the UK playing a role in that. I'm really surprised that you would like something like this to go through Parliament. What do you think would happen if this was put to a vote in the House of Commons? You think there isn't a majority in the House of Commons to support Ukraine? There totally is.
I do, but I was told there was a majority to support Syria back in 2013. And we had the debate. I accept that it's different, but what I'm talking about here is escalation. There's also an irony, Mark, that, and Stella's right, there is a majority in Britain that wants to help Ukraine, up to a certain point, and yet, overwhelmingly now, the Ukrainian people want peace talks. Overwhelmingly. So isn't the right thing to do in 58 days' time, when Donald Trump goes into the White House, to attempt a negotiation that ends killing on a vast scale?
Here's the risk. If we were to freeze the conflict, let's say that they stopped on the lines that they're in, just for argument's sake for a moment, because ultimately I think it's down to the Ukrainians what they could accept, but just for the sake of debate, if they froze where they were, then Putin says, I've got the Crimea, I've got all the industrial areas in the Donbass. I stopped Ukraine joining NATO. I've won. That's what he would say, and then he'll wait 2 or 3 years. I mean, Russian tank factories are on 3 shifts. They've already pretty much replaced...
It's their whole economy now, isn't it?
That is an absolute war economy. So he'd wait a few years, and then he'd think, well, do you know what, I'm going to have another go. And I'll put it to you bluntly, if we don't stop him in Ukraine, we'll have to stop him in the Baltic states. And if we don't stop him in the Baltic states, we'll have to stop him in Poland. And by then, you really are into something that looks like World War III.
What if part of, just moving it on for a sort of last final thought, what if part of this negotiation is, of course, there is a debate about territory, and that's going to be the hardest part of it, although a majority of Ukrainians are prepared to sacrifice some land just to get peace. But what if the loss for Putin was that we gave guarantees hereafter to Ukraine from NATO?
Well, Ukraine would say there were guarantees in 2004.
But not membership.
Well, I remember I read an article in one of the colour supplements about a year ago from the guy that was in charge of the Ukrainian-based nuclear weapons that were part of the old Soviet strategic rocket forces. It's a very emotive article. He said he pleaded with the Ukrainian government not to give up their nuclear weapons. He said, I told them this is exactly what would happen. And that's a point worth making to Jeremy Corbyn with his C&D back.
Well, do you know what?
Isn't it?
This is a good debate. In conclusion, folks, I posed this question. I was pleased about what happened over Syria in 2013, but on balance, the British government has to have the ability to act militarily, otherwise nobody in the world would respect us or fear us. So government has to have that power, but I would say, as often as is possible, Parliament should get, and the country should get, a debate and a vote. Thank you for that. After this, let's talk about Lord Prescott, who's died aged 86. Was he the last working-class hero in the British Parliament?
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, you know, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So, I asked you at home, should Parliament get a vote on sending more weapons to Ukraine? Nicolette replies, yes, there should be a vote. British arms across Russia and Ukraine could be interpreted as direct engagement with Russia. Therefore, we are at war with Russia. Do we want this? We probably can't defend ourselves if Russia decides to engage with us. This is madness. And Robin says, sorry, Nigel, on this one you are wrong. Having sold weapons to Ukraine, we should let them decide on where and how to use them. Robin, I'm not wrong about it. I want to have a debate about it. And all I worry about is we escalate and escalate without having a proper parliamentary debate at any stage. Now, Lord Prescott has died aged 86. John Prescott, who was in the Merchant Navy, a trade unionist, a committed socialist. He was an MEP. People forget that, back in the late 1970s. He was an MP. And he was, of course, our Deputy Prime Minister for 10 years. And, quite unusually, His Majesty the King has paid a tribute. I am deeply saddened to learn of the death of Lord Prescott. I remember with great fondness his unique an indomitable character, as well as his infectious sense of humour. My thoughts and greatest sympathy are with Lord Prescott's wife, family and loved ones at such a difficult time. And I'm sure very many people will recognise and greatly appreciate Lord Prescott's decades of public service in frontline politics, not least as the UK's longest ever serving Deputy Prime Minister. Well, that really is a very, very nice tribute. Now, of course, there was the famous incident in 2001 when somebody gave him abuse from the crowd and he got a right hook from John Prescott, but it was, and you're going to see this on your screens in a moment, when he wasn't putting up any nonsense. I'm not sure today how people would react to it. But he was an extraordinary figure, and I was very, very struck by an article written by Trevor Kavanagh. Fiery John Prescott was proud to be a blunt-speaking northerner. He was the last authentic voice of Britain's working class, and Trevor joins me now. He was a larger-than-life character, wasn't he?
Very much so, and I think he revelled in that fact. I mean, he was a former boxer himself. He was a prize-winning boxer, and in fact the prize was awarded to him on one of the ocean liners by Sir Anthony Eden, who had just retired as Conservative Prime Minister.
Good Lord.
So that left jab that he gave to that poor bloke who threw an egg at him probably landed with some force.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Trevor, you make the point. I mean, you've been covering politics, Parliament for decades. There were lots of John Prescott-type figures. There were people like Dennis Skinner. They'd worked down the pit, they'd worked their way up in the union, they'd commanded the respect of their colleagues, they'd become members of Parliament. Looking at the numbers, fewer than 10%, probably nearer 5%, of MPs in Parliament today could be defined as coming from working-class backgrounds. And what interests me is, we're always talking about diversity and inclusion, that we have to have, race quotas and gender quotas. No one ever talks about the fact that the working classes are being excluded increasingly from public life.
Well, that's true, and it's ironic that John Prescott, as a senior figure in the Labour government, was part of the regime that wiped out the working class representations in Parliament, because from the moment that the Blair government was elected, a new path into politics was created, which was from university, usually Oxbridge, and then into working as a SPAD in the constituency, and then after working for a SPAD for a while, they'd become MPs themselves, climb straight into cabinet, and then leave through the back door to join some huge corporation in the area of expertise they had gathered while acting as a cabinet minister.
And the House of Lords at the same time.
And then on to the House of Lords, of course.
Is politics missing that authentic voice?
Well, I think it's missing it right now, because what's happened is that this particular government, the Starmer government, which does have a couple of working class people, Angela Rayner is a very good example. I think someone compares her to John Prescott as the authentic voice of the working class, but by and large, they're professionals. They're not people who are motivated by the needs of the nation, the public interest, public service, and all of that. So I think that the mistakes that are being made by the Labour government, of which there are legion, are basically because they're totally out of touch with the working classes. They don't understand the working classes. And so the budget that Rachel Reeves has brought in to stabilise the economy has actually damaged the interests of the very people they're supposed to be representing.
Stella, Trevor makes strong points that the Labour Party lost touch with the working classes.
Incredibly weak points, especially the last one about the budget weakening the working class. What is the working class for you, Trevor, or for you, Nigel? You're talking about the working class, and you're talking about people who used to work down the mines. Well, guess what? There are no mines. People my age, or even people younger than me, they don't have jobs like that.
So are you saying there is no working class?
You wouldn't recognise the working class if it was looking at you in the face, because you are looking for people your age. Nigel.
No, people tell me I'm working class. They're proud to be working class. They
there
might
are
not,
middle-class
they
people
might
out
not
there
work
who call
in bits.
themselves working class, but you know what? There are people out there who should be the working class you're trying to represent, but you don't recognize them because they don't speak like people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And I think this is the problem that we're coming down, and this is what we miss about someone like John Prescott, is the fact that he was allowed to be authentically himself. But young people who come from poor backgrounds, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How do we allow people who are poor, not people who were born into privilege, to get into politics?
Well, the Labour Party doesn't do it anymore. That's the point Trevor's making.
The Labour Party is consistently talking about the working class, but you had 14 years of a Conservative government that has completely decimated their chances of ever having enough money to, for example, run a campaign, which is just extremely expensive.
Come on, apart from Angela Rayner, I mean, you're nearly as posh as this lot over here, aren't you now?
Absolutely
well, of course you are. It's the Notting Hill set, it's the North London set, it's the Hampstead set.
Absolutely not. Do you really, are you really comparing the party of, and you know, bless him, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and Eton? How many prime ministers has the Conservative Party had from Eton? How many people from Eton do you think
do you know
are
what?
there?
And also, they've had working class women born into working class backgrounds. You know, Liz Truss went to a comprehensive school. Margaret Thatcher grew up over a grocer's shop. Actually, maybe you're the party of social mobility.
Well, I think actually Stella raises an interesting point around education. You know, one of the big things that has changed the social mobility in this country, including helping people become politicians, is the abolition in so many parts of the country of grammar schools.
I couldn't agree more.
And, you know, the abolition of grammar schools has meant that people of yesteryear, like people like John Major in our party, who was, you know, a working-class guy who left school.
So why wouldn't your party bring them back?
Well, I've long been an advocate for doing
they all say that when they come
and,
all say that.
And we, of course, drove forward free schools across the country, which is a great innovation that Labour right now are abolishing. And this is further proof that they don't care about social mobility in this country. All they are focused on is 50% of people going to university so they can keep people on this sausage, machine of keeping people off unemployment stats.
I'm going to close this. Trevor, I said that everyone's remembered for one thing in the Prescott Punch. What will you remember John Prescott for?
I'll remember him for the regular calls I used to get in the morning. As soon as I walked into the office, the phone would ring and I'd written perhaps something about John in some context. And I picked the phone up and hear, Prescott here. And I knew I was in for a bollocking.
Trevor, thank you for sharing your thoughts on John Prescott. In a minute, a great victory. Alison Pearson, she was here with us on Monday night. Essex Police have dropped all the charges. But what about the dozens of other people every day in this country that get the knock on the door? We're going to discuss what are the limits to free speech and how we got it wrong with the hate law legislation in this country.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. The snow and ice risk continues this evening and overnight, and it is going to remain cold before we introduce unsettled weather over the weekend as Storm Bert moves its way in from the west. For the time being, though, we remain in this cold northerly Arctic flow, bringing us that snow and ice risk, so still plenty of snow showers feeding their way in, mainly across northern coast of Scotland, a few feeding into northern coast of Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales, though some may feed inland at times. Where we see the clear skies overnight, that's where we're expecting quite a sharp frost and some patches of ice too. So do take care if you're out and about during early Friday morning. So the showers are set to continue around coastal areas of Scotland, though some may feed inland at times with a brisk northerly flow pushing them inland. Mainly falling as snow over high ground, though likely to see some flurries to lower levels too. A few showers feeding into northern coast of Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales too, so still a snow risk here. But otherwise there'll be plenty of bright sunshine to start on Friday, but still feeling particularly chilly and with those icy stretches too. So otherwise, for Friday, it's going to be a mix once again of those wintry showers and some bright sunshine. Showers mainly feeding into northwestern coasts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales. These heavy at times and turning to sleet and snow, mainly above high ground, but once again could fall to lower levels too. Elsewhere, plenty of autumnal sunshine, but once again it is going to be feeling chilly for this time in November. As we head into Saturday, unsettled weather as Storm Bert moves its way in from the west. Heavy outbreaks of rain, this falling to snow at times in the north and strong winds across parts of Scotland too. And we do have an amber snow and ice warning issued for parts of Scotland, so do stay up to date to our forecasts. So an unsettled weekend ahead. Otherwise, that is it from me. Bye-bye for now.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So I'm very pleased to say that all the charges against Alison Pearson, or potential charges, have been dropped. Alison herself has given us this statement. I am hugely relieved that Essex police have come to their senses. It's scary and upsetting for a law-abiding, decent person to face an accusation of stirring up racial hatred. What my case has revealed is the appalling overuse of non-crime hate incidents to silence opinions that everyone down the pub would think were completely normal. Free speech is a precious part of the British identity. We can now agree the police should spend time catching criminals, not believing complaints from random people that say they've been offended. Well, that's absolutely right. And 3 police forces, can you believe, were involved in this? And Essex police have issued a statement. We investigate crimes reported to us without fear or favour. We're sometimes faced with allegations of crime where people have strong opposing views. That's why we work so hard to remain impartial and to investigate allegations regardless of where they might lead. Very good. Now, you can take that as seriously as you want to. I'm delighted for Alison, and I know she was genuinely worried and concerned about this. But what about the dozens of other people who every single day get a knock on the door from the police? They're told they've been reported for a non-crime hate incident, and yet that will remain on their records, may well damage their prospects of getting jobs. It's all gone way too far. Now, Lionel Shriver, author and journalist, has written a piece in today's Spectator about this, and she thinks we need a very, very big reversal. And Lionel joins me live. Down the line, I read your piece earlier. So just tell us, where do you think the limits of free speech ought to move to?
I think this whole category of hate speech is a slippery slope and the beginning of the end of free speech. After all, hate speech is in the eye of the beholder. And in fact, even legally in the UK, that is how it's defined. It's hate speech if anybody calls it hate speech instantly. And that's why Alison was persecuted as well as prosecuted, because some fellow ex-civil servant, I think it was a fellow, objected, and then it went on for a year and involved 3 police forces. This is absurd. In the United States, there's no such thing as hate speech laws. And I think that the UK should get with that program. They're regarded as unconstitutional because they violate the First Amendment.
You're right. I mean, Alison, when she said to the police, who's made this accusation? Oh, no, Miss Pearson. The victim. That if someone takes offence, they are a victim automatically. So should we, under your definition, and I fully understand the importance of the First Amendment and the way America feels about all of this, and quite right too, should we be allowed to cause offence to whole groups of people? Should we be able to say, I don't like the Irish, or the Scottish are all mean, or a Yorkshireman never buys his round, or even things about different racial groups, religious groups? Should we, in your view, be free to say those things, knowing they'll cause offence, but not being insightful?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that we should draw the line if it's an incitement to violence.
Yes.
But otherwise, we tend to forget there's nothing illegal about racism, about being racist. And we all, have vague categorical opinions about groups of people. I know a lot of those opinions are wrong, but it shouldn't be a crime to be mistaken or even to be prejudiced. We all have our prejudices, and there's nothing wrong with expressing unpleasant views, and there is nothing illegal, or there shouldn't be, about offending people, because the truth is that there's hardly a thought in the world that doesn't offend somebody.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start saying you can't offend people, you don't have free speech anymore. I mean, a very good example is, in the eye of many beholders, if you say a single discouraging word about a permissive immigration policy, you're racist. And therefore, you can't have that discussion. And yet that's a very important discussion for any country to have. Where do we draw the line? Who do we want in? How many? Do we integrate them? But no, to question immigration at all is potentially, for a lot of people, is to be prejudiced.
Lorna Shriver, thank you very much indeed for giving us those very, very clear views. Now, what was just said was kind of what I grew up with. Sticks and stones can't break my bones. People say rude things, ignore them, move on. Now, through legislation, we've got police behaving like this. It was interesting, Stella, in the House of Commons today, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying that, he was really worried about the level of hate speech in this country. Lorna Shriver may be giving a position that many will find difficult to believe or accept these days, but quite logical. Do we need to rethink the legislation around this on hate speech laws?
I think both can be true. I think you can both be concerned about hate speech, and you can also want to have this free speech absolutism that you're saying. Because in my opinion, what we need to have is social repercussions for people who are expressing opinions that we find to be deeply offensive. So while there aren't any legal ones, because, as we said, this situation with Alison Pearson it's ridiculous. There isn't actually any law that makes what Alison Pearson did illegal. Let's be clear about that. So we don't need to change the legislation there. The legislation is fine. What's wrong is, for whatever reason, that police force in Essex thought that this was a good use for the time.
Well, we have these things now called protected categories. I mean, why not just treat everyone the same? I mean, wouldn't that be more consistent?
But I'm sure there are cases there, Nigel, which, if you knew of, you would agree that this is a matter that needs to be dealt with. But what I think we need to return to is, look, you find something someone said deeply offensive, great. Don't be their friend. Shame them publicly. I have no problem with that. Don't hire them if you don't want to. That's it.
So it's a matter of taste, in a sense.
Well, I think there is a context point here, but on the protected characteristic issue that you raised, I mean, this is a hangover from the last Labour government, and hands up, the Conservative government could have done more on this, absolutely.
Well, it did nothing.
It did some things, but it could have done more on this, and, I think a lot of people are beginning to see this as a huge problem because it's a question of priorities. So, yes, there's the context, but there's also the question of priorities. It is not a good use of finite police resources for police forces, 3 police forces, to be investigating a journalist. And it shows we've got our priorities wrong as a country. So whatever we make of the issue, whatever we make of people causing offence or not, it's about putting police resources where it's really needed.
It's all part of two-tier justice, two-tier policing and legislation that I think needs changing. A quick What the Farage moment. I have to do this because I want to talk about the BBC. Keir Starmer quoting BBC Verify, backing up his facts about how many small farms would be affected by inheritance tax, which is completely at odds with what many other economists think. Now we learn that the expert at the BBC, and you might have heard of this fella, Dan Needle, has been around for a couple of years. Independent tax expert. Oh, no, he's not. It turns out he's been a member of the Labour Party for 35 years, and he is an activist. Independent tax expert. I should cocoa. It's all nonsense. It shows that the BBC, frankly, over the farming issue, have not played with a straight bat. In a moment, we're going to talk about something that is complicated but very, very important. Nissan are saying that the net zero targets, the electric vehicle targets, if we continue with current government policy, could be catastrophic for the British car industry. All of that at a time when China are making more and more far cheaper electric cars, and the European Union and America are putting up tariffs. What should we do?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week is Chocolate Week, the ultimate celebration of everything rich, sweet and indulgent.
Yes, and we now have the best person in the studio with us to satisfy all of your chocolate cravings. We're joined now by master chocolatier Ollie the Choc. Ollie,
hello.
Really
Hey,
good
Ollie.
to see you this
Thank
morning.
you for having me.
And you brought some of your chocolate in with you.
I did. I brought some tasting samples. You're very welcome to help yourself.
So what have you got here? Tell us.
So this is my signature chocolate. I call it the Holy Grail. It's got sea salt flakes, crushed Oreo, caramel fudge pieces, very Moorish.
I love a caramel and salt combo, just, you know. I feel like you see it everywhere now. Look.
You won't be disappointed.
Look, I want everyone to see a close-up of this one. Can we get a shot on this one? So this is Oreo, there we are, caramel and salt. Do you want to try some?
You go first. Help yourselves. And then this bar of chocolate is a little bit of a wild card. That's a mystery flavour, so...
OK, I love a mystery.
I'm not going to tell you what that is.
Hold on this one. This one's amazing.
Are you?
Oreo, caramel.
That's my biggest seller.
I'll keep my palate clean for this. So this is a mystery flavour.
You've got to guess what that is.
Is that a nut in there, I see? Right, here we go. Ready?
I'm not saying anything.
Talk us through.
Very crunchy.
For me, I'm all about textures in chocolate.
Me too.
It has got a good crunch to it, hasn't it? It's not the kind of flavour that you would expect.
Oh, I can't get it.
Is it sweet? Is it salty?
Wait, no, it's salty, yeah.
It's
OK,
salty.
hang on, bit more.
OK.
Bit more.
I mean, just keep going.
Crisps? Wait,
It is crispy, it's crunchy. Could it be crisps?
I think it could be crisps. Yeah, it's crisps.
So what flavour?
Salt and vinegar. Cheese and onion.
Yes,
Salt and
nailed it. You know.
Oh, you're much better than me.
Love that.
Do you know what? I think I've got a bit of a cold, so my taste buds are
Oh,
off.
you're going to blame that, are you?
That's my excuse. That's delicious.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So a very clear statement from Nissan saying that if we stick to the zero-emission car targets, it will have, and I quote, an irreversible impact on the British motor industry. Now, you might remember the mad Green Conservatives putting in this target that by 2030 there'd be no more manufacture or sale of petrol and diesel cars. That, of course, was completely unworkable, so it's been shifted to 2035, but the pressure is still on. Many big car companies have put huge resources in Britain and Europe into developing electric cars. Most of them have taken very, very big losses as they found that consumer demand for electric cars is nothing like they thought it would be. And indeed, one of the factors in that is that second-hand EV sales have really fallen very, very sharply, while second-hand sales of particularly diesel cars that do long distances with a fairly economic rate have held remarkably firm. Whichever way we cut this, it's a complicated argument because the European Union are very worried about this. They're going to put tariffs, quite big tariffs actually, on cars and batteries coming in from China. Donald Trump has fought the election, winning in the car-making areas like Detroit by saying, I'll protect you from cheap imports from China. We find ourselves outside the European Union. We find ourselves still stuck to net zero targets. We find ourselves in a fascinating position. What, Ranil Jayawardena, should we do?
Well, I'm instinctively someone who believes in free trade, but when you look at the way China doesn't play by the rules, whether it's on steel, the production of steel itself, or indeed finished products like cars, then it is right that a government should act. And I think there is scope for us to be proponents of free trade, for example, trying to go after a new trade deal with the new administration in the US to open up new trade and investment, whilst at the same time defending the trading, the rules-based trading system and standing up to China. And when it comes to cars and so on, you know, there's the sort of production methods that there are in China, the people, the way the people are treated, and so on. And indeed, the economic imperialism that there is in Africa from the Chinese mining companies. I think there's a lot that we should be concerned
is Trump right to talk about tariffs? Are the EU right to talk about tariffs?
I think in this context and dealing with the way that China does not play by the rules, I think both are right.
Stella, what are your instincts on this?
My instinct on this is that we need to stop having foreign companies bullying our government, because our local manufacturers are going to be in a disadvantage unless they are able to access the European market. And also, industry needs to have rules that they know are going to be kept for the long term. If the governments keep on doing U-turns, then we're not going to have that kind of trust. And the reason why EV cars, the reason why there isn't more demand for this type of vehicle is because the Conservative government for the last 14 years, they had the opportunity to invest in infrastructure and they didn't do it, and that's where we find
But isn't
ourselves
it actually
now.
they're really not much use, are they? I mean, I can't drive from home to Cornwall without stopping for 25
Because there
minutes.
isn't the infrastructure
No,
there.
even with the infrastructure, I've still got to stop. The range of these things is way below expectation. The purchase price until China flood the market is very, very high. Frankly, I mean, I know, you know, driving a Tesla, it's great fun. They're incredible. You know, for short journeys, going around town, whatever, they're great. But frankly, for many, many people in practical terms, they still don't work, do
But
they?
Nigel, you're a fan of Elon Musk, right? Don't you want, as a patriot, the UK to be able to compete in the market of the future?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. But that's why I ask you, should we join the EU and America and put tariffs on China? That's the first thought.
I'm kind of positive on that, if I'm honest with you. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's almost unavoidable. I think, Jacob, I mean, this is a subject that you care about very, very deeply. You're a natural, classical free trader, but Janel's point is right, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Go on.
The reason China is so much cheaper is its energy is so much cheaper. You had that chart last week. I tweeted that chart from the Financial Times. If your energy is a sixth of the price of our energy, making batteries, making electric cars is going to be much cheaper. So we have put weights on our industry, and then we're saying the Chinese are unfair. No, we've just been stupid. And we've got to get away from this net zero nonsense. We make very good petrol engine cars. We should carry on making them. We should carry on selling them. We should scrap the targets. And if Elon Musk makes brilliant cars, people will buy them. There wasn't a need for government regulation to make people go from the horse and cart to the motor car. They did it because it was better and more economic. Market forces will win. And actually, if the Chinese taxpayer wishes to subsidise goods to come to the UK, the person who pays is the Chinese taxpayer. British consumers are better off.
OK. So we basically scrap net zero policy.
Of course we scrap net zero as soon as possible.
To allow ourselves to become competitive.
No.
It's quite tempting, isn't it? By the way, I showed a chart last week that our industries are now paying the most expensive electricity in the world by a very long way. And I suspect that Miliband's mad rush for solar and wind is going to make those prices go even higher. Jacob's point, there is some validity there, isn't there?
There are some things that I agree with Jacob on energy. I do think there are some tragedies in the way we have dealt with our energy security in this country. Most of all, the fact that we haven't built nuclear plants.
I agree with that.
We had plenty of opportunities to do that. And why is it that everything is costing so much more in this country? Nuclear power here is 4 to 6 times more expensive than it is in Korea.
Well, and equally, the more wind turbines we build, the higher our bills go. I mean, that is an undeniable fact, isn't it?
Well, just on the point around China and the Chinese taxpayer paying for the cars, to come back to that, I mean, I think there is the risk of our economic security in the long run. If they flood the market, if they put everyone out of business in the short run, we may not have the ability to compete, whatever the energy price in the years ahead. So I think we've got to think strategically about it.
And I'm going to come back on Jacob on that, because I saw that with steel. You know, of course they had cheaper energy, but they literally flooded the world with steel, selling it at a loss, and that made it very difficult.
They sold at a loss because they had overproduced. It was market forces. Oversupply led to a fall in price. But the reason our steel industry is closing down is because of net zero. That's put our steel industry out of business.
It's the primary reason. It's not the only reason.
And there is a nonsense currently on electric cars. If you look at where our electricity is being generated from, about half of it every day is from gas. Now, turning gas into electricity, then putting in a battery and then driving on it is massively less efficient than putting petrol in your engine in the first place. And so you get more emissions through generating
I mean, these
waste.
arguments could go around forever. Whatever the vision that everybody had, that we'd all fall in love with EVs, hasn't yet happened by a long, long shot. Do you own an EV?
My wife actually drives an EV. I used to drive it, as I said, as you said, around London. But for long distances, we have a diesel too.
No, honestly, for short distances around town, they're fine, provided you've got somewhere decent to plug.
And I think both governments, both the Conservative government and the Labour government now, have missed a trick around hybrids, because I think that is actually a very sensible technology that allows short distances to be electric only, if that's what people want to do, particularly to improve air quality, but gives people that flexibility and confidence that the long distances, the journey down to Cornwall, is going to be possible without stopping.
Stella?
Yes, I agree. Hybrids are underestimated.
Is that where you drive?
I don't drive. I just walk everywhere because I'm so climate-friendly, Nigel.
Well, if you want to walk to Cornwall, that's marvellous. doesn't really quite work for me, but thank you. And I would like to say that I'm driving a Jaguar with that wonderful symbol on the front and those incredible sexy adverts that we saw for decades. But now I'm afraid I couldn't quite work out what the advert was all about, really. Sort of a series of androgynous figures, some new design logo. I do hope they go bankrupt. I'm sure they will.
I actually think they're in a lot of trouble.
Well, we saw it with Bud Light. What is it with the advertising industry?
Do you remember Margaret Thatcher putting the Kleenex on the British Airways logo when it went for an ethnic logo?
Jacob, what have you got tonight?
We're going to talk about defence. Labour cutting half a billion pounds from defence when it's given over £1 billion in increased pay rises to its friends in the public sector. It's a question of priorities, and they're getting their priorities very wrong.
Let alone the £8 billion they've given to Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine is part of defence.
You could argue that.
It's part
you could also argue very, very strange spending priorities. Well, tonight we've argued everything round the houses. I hope you've enjoyed the programme as much as I have. I'm back with you on Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. First, though, let's have a look at the all-important weather.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. The snow and ice risk continues this evening and overnight, and it is going to remain cold before we introduce unsettled weather over the weekend as Storm Bert moves its way in from the west. For the time being, though, we remain in this cold northerly Arctic flow, bringing us that snow and ice risk, so still plenty of snow showers feeding their way in, mainly across northern coast of Scotland, a few feeding into northern coast of Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales, though some may feed inland at times. Where we see the clear skies overnight, that's where we're expecting quite a sharp frost and some patches of ice too. So do take care if you're out and about during early Friday morning. So the showers are set to continue around coastal areas of Scotland, though some may feed inland at times with a brisk northerly flow pushing them inland. Mainly falling as snow over high ground, though likely to see some flurries to lower levels too. A few showers feeding into northern coast of Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales too, so still a snow risk here. But otherwise there'll be plenty of bright sunshine to start on Friday, but still feeling particularly chilly and with those icy stretches too. So otherwise, forecast for Friday is going to be a mix once again of those wintry showers and some bright sunshine. Showers mainly feeding into northwestern coasts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and northern parts of Wales. These heavy at times and turning to sleet and snow, mainly above high ground, but once again could fall to lower levels too. Elsewhere, plenty of autumnal sunshine, but once again it is going to be feeling chilly for this time in November. As we head into Saturday, unsettled weather as Storm Bert moves its way in from the west. Heavy outbreaks of rain, this falling to snow at times in the north, and strong winds across parts of Scotland too. And we do have an amber snow and ice warning issued for parts of Scotland, so do stay up to date to our forecasts. So an unsettled weekend ahead. Otherwise, that is it from me. Bye-bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed boiler repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win